Hei og velkommen til Skeiv dagsorden. Dette er podcasten hvor Thea og Mariann fra Senter for Likestilling prater om aktuelle skeive saker. Hello, B, and hello, Camilla. This will be our very first episode in English, and I'm very happy to have you two here to talk about the situation for trans and queer people in the UK right now. To start us off, could each of you introduce yourselves? Who are you?
Great question.
Yes.
Okay, I'll go first. I'm B, or Dr. B. Hughes, if people want my full title and name. My pronouns are they, them, and I'm a non-binary person, I guess queer activist, and a senior lecturer in the UK at Liverpool John Moores University.
And I'm Dr. Camilla Mørk Røstvik, and I'm your colleague here at UiA from history. My pronouns are she, her, and I work on menstrual history and culture, which is how we met. And I was in Britain for a very long time. So even though I'm in Norway now, I've kind of observed some of these things. But B is still based in Britain.
Yes.
Yeah, so you'll be able to give us the up-to-date live info, unfortunately.
Unfortunately.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I saw that the ILGA rainbow map just came out recently.
Yes.
Was it today or yesterday?
I think it was yesterday.
Yeah, and the UK has fallen from around over 80% to like 40%
Yeah.
on that
Yeah.
scale, which is quite a big fall.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's gone down on the rankings list quite a lot as well. But from what I've managed to quickly catch up on kind of WhatsApp chats and speaking to people while I've been here, like the rankings system or survey or how, I don't know what the method is, but that's all kind of calculated before the Supreme Court judgment.
Oh, really?
I think, yeah. So
So they haven't put that in.
next time,
It's going to be even worse.
it's going to be even worse, I think. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's not that surprising because even with the Supreme Court thing, feels like a climax to something.
Yeah.
But a movement that has roots.
Yes,
So
absolutely.
that's really horrible, of course.
Yeah, I would like to ask you, like, how have you experienced the social and political climate for trans people, especially, and also for queer people in the UK over the past years? Because it's been quite a downhill the last few years. Yeah.
Yes.
How have you experienced it?
I guess, well, the first thing I should say is because of where I work and I have a cis male partner, so a lot of people often read me as in a heterosexual relationship, just, because that's what people default to. And various other, various positionalities. I think in some ways I have had a much less sharp or difficult experience because I have been somewhat shielded just because, I can pass for cis or pass for straight, or sometimes my queerness is completely erased, But it's never, it's always there, that kind of background insecurity or being unsure of whether you're in a completely safe space or you're going to come up against blatant transphobia or microaggression type misgendering. We have a lot of queer students, and I feel it's really important to be out in the workplace as someone that they can see. Because, there are lots of queer academics, but there's also a lot of that whole thing of you shouldn't bring your personal self into the workplace. It should be, the kind of myth of the academic person. But, students worry about it. And even, right now, I know that students are wondering if the universities that they've chosen to go to will be safe for them and inclusive. But that's not a new question. I fairly speak at Pride or in LGBT plus inclusive protests in the city, and afterwards, I always say this is the uni I'm from, this is the trade union that I'm part of, come and talk to us if you need support. And I've had, I think probably 2021 or 2022, I had a young person come up to me after speaking at one of these rallies saying, I'm going to this university in September, is it safe for me? So it's not a new question, and it's not a new thing that young queer people are worrying about. Yeah, I mean, it's there. And then I think in universities as well, they've become quite a space of pointed discussion, quote unquote debate, which I think we could both talk about in terms of the legitimization or attempted legitimization of gender critical as a academic freedom or freedom of speech issue. That's been a really big issue in universities.
So that means critical to like trans people or trans...
Basically,
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, in the British context, gender critical, I guess, is what these people and thinkers would call themselves, whereas trans exclusionary, radical feminist is maybe more of a term used from people who are critical to that. So even the term gender critical to me, then I'm always like, what does that mean? It's almost like a dog whistle term. But that came from a lot of academics, and there were prominent academics who... I mean, being an academic is also a privileged position where you can test out ideas. Obviously, academic freedom of speech is extremely important. We know that now. We all know that always, but like in the US, obviously, extreme examples. So some of this stuff in the UK also happened in the universities with people testing out so-called gender critical thinking. How their students felt about that would be an interesting question too, because we all have queer students, and this I don't understand, but the academic setting is key in the UK, and as it is in Norway too, right?
Yeah.
Plenty of academics are involved in gender critical, trans exclusionary activism here. Yeah. So I guess this is also how we felt it in work, because we work on a topic that is highly gendered.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So, yeah, can you tell us a bit about the topics that you are working on?
Yeah. Okay. So, as Camilla mentioned a bit ago, we met through both being interested in menstruation and menstrual art history and menstrual art specifically. So my research, so I'm a kind of culture and visual culture scholar, but also a practicing artist. So in about 2015 or 16, I started making some work about having periods and documenting that. And partway through this kind of quite long project, I figured out that I wasn't cis, so non-binary. And that was a very interesting journey to be doing alongside and within also doing your PhD. Yeah, I started looking at not just like the social construction of menstruation and its representation in media and art, but also gender and what does it actually mean to be non-binary? What are non-binary bodies? What is legitimate? How do we... People of all sorts of different gender identities still have bodies, and without pathologizing them, being obsessive about kind of genitals in a transphobic way, we still have bodily processes like menstruation that we, so what does all this mean? How can we talk about it? How can we find language to think about these experiences is kind of part of where that research took me. But yeah, we met and talked about kind of art history initially and art practice. So maybe that's a good point to throw over to you, Camilla.
Yeah, and so I work on the art history of menstruation, including kind of corporate images, but also radical art. And I think ever since that relatively tiny movement in the arts, there's always been queer people who have made menstrual art. So that's just a thing I've, documented, been interested in. And then in the contemporary art scene, people like B, but also others, do interrogate the crossover between kind of gender identities and menstruation. And I think that's really interesting because it's obviously menstruation is a taboo topic. It's something that we, as you were saying earlier today, is something that we never see, right? Even though it happens all the time. So that's taboo. But then there's things about gender that is taboo too. And especially if you put a cis feminine identity into the menstrual discourse space, that clash, we've seen it weaponized and used, for example, in the UK by figures like Rowling and so on. So
can you talk a little bit more about that? In what way have it been used?
Yeah, so I mean, one way that we have kind of seen this wave of transphobia in the UK in our work is that working on menstruation, one of Rowling's most, not the first, but one of the most cited and I'd say impactful tweets about trans people had to do with menstruation. So she was referencing an article there that used the term people who menstruate. Okay?
So it's an inclusive...
It's an inclusive term.
Yeah.
But then, and she made, the tweet that she makes is, in a sense, you know, creative. It's offensive, and it kind of says, "Oh, wibbid woman, wabben."
Yeah.
Didn't there used to be a
Yeah.
term for this? People who menstruate, right? So there's clearly a critique there, right? But then kind of went back and looked at what was that article that she then, you know, she cited it directly in her tweet. That article, I mean, yes, it was inclusive because it had to be, and it's about charity work. I think including also in the global south, how to help people who can't access products, who have pain. And it was also involving scholars. You know, from that moment, I think it was like a bit of an explosion that went off in our field because she put menstrual research on the map, not thinking that that's what she was doing. And all the extremely difficult work that, for example, the World Health Organization is doing, WASH, the big health organization, are doing to help people with menstrual issues all around the world was made into a joke. So of course it's offensive in terms of, you know, trans people and non-binary people, but it's also offensive to researchers, this using of these ideas. And that term, people who menstruate, I don't know who first came up with that, but it's something that I'd say most scholars in our field use.
Absolutely.
Because we have to be precise.
Yes.
And not all women menstruate.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Not all cis women menstruate for so many reasons. When people like Rowling would be like, oh, there's a word for that, woman. It's like, are women not people?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, where is your logic here?
Yeah.
So it was kind of, you know, these things have been talked about and thought about by thinkers and philosophers and medics in menstrual research for decades. And then you come in and you make an ill-considered joke. And I felt it was a bit of a bomb, like in the research field, to be kind of dramatic about it, because suddenly that had to be addressed. And there was a period I felt where you were kind of sussing out other people in the field, being like, what do you think about that? And it just stole energy and time, and also maybe turned a bit of our research into a joke as an extreme case of, you know, what you want to call wokeism or whatever.
Yeah, it's quite a good example of how transphobia also affects women negatively.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But could you tell us a little bit more about like her role in this shift that we have seen?
I mean, I try not to think about J.K. Rowling very much.
Yeah.
Understandable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To me, I think it's like a distancing thing to try and cope in some ways.
Yeah.
But to me, she's like horrible evil monster, you know? Like, she's a billionaire. She has loads of power, and she has just been incredibly vocal, mostly online, but she has been given platforms over and over again, whether that's because of her online engagement or just general media interest, in to kind of really be like a lightning rod to polarize this discussion. And she's not the only one by far. You know, there are lots of British A to D list celebrities joining in these like online so-called debates. But I think J.K. Rowling has been so central because the Harry Potter books were so formative for so many people, including queer people.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
especially queer people.
Queer people.
Yeah.
Although we now, as we've all like become elder millennials, are like unpacking all the problematic things in those books too. But they were really formative. They really meant so much to people. And then to see the author of that world that we were so bought into, so destroying the legacy of that work by being so awful.
Yeah.
And then, you know, the actors who were in the films, you know, being like so cool and such great allies, and her calling them ungrateful. And I think it's partly that, like, that's part of the centrality of her role, has been like her fame, rather than her having anything particularly new or intelligent to say. Having a platform, being so well known, and she's just ridiculously offensive on so many levels.
I'd also add that she is in the category of artist, right? She's a writer, she's a fiction writer. And I think there's also, as a historian, I think J.K. Rowling will go down in history for this, as well as the book. It will be noted, whatever you think about transphobia, that was part of her life and part of her political beliefs. But she is a creative person, and she is a woman. And I think it's just very important. I get what you say, and it also kind of depends where you're coming from. Like, I totally get that non-binary and trans people in particular just don't want to think about her. I get that. I'm thinking I'm not in that group. And as a historian, I'm very interested in documenting these things. So I think about her a lot. And I think and it's already starting to happen that academics are writing her into this history and that it will be this lightning rod moment. But yes, she's not alone. But like, when there is a woman doing this kind of stuff, we have to document that too, and not just say, she doesn't know what she's doing. She's just part of a movement. It's not thought about. It's very well considered. She's very good with words. I think there's no mistake that first tweet that kind of went viral was, I guess, to some people, humorous and creative. She isn't there by accident.
No, you're right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so we have seen her use her power and her voice quite a lot the last years. But now in the Supreme Court ruling, she also used her money to support this.
Yep.
We have talked a little bit about this in a previous episode, but could you take us a little bit through what it means?
Yeah. So there's a piece of really important equality legislation in the United Kingdom called the Equality Act that came in 2010. It is flawed in lots of ways. We can critique it in lots of ways, but it is a very important piece of equality law that enshrines 9 protected characteristics in legal terms that should be protected from discrimination against, and people can be held accountable if someone is discriminated against under one of those categories.
Yeah, we have a similar law in Norway, which is called likestillings- and diskrimineringsloven.
Okay.
Just if someone wants to read up on that. Yeah.
Yeah, great. No. Yeah. And this particular case was brought by 4 women in Scotland, but they brought a question to the Supreme Court for asking for clarification of the Equality Act. And the case question was, is a person with a full gender recognition certificate, GRC, which I can tell you what that is in a second, which recognises that their gender is female, a woman, in quote marks, for the purposes of the Equality Act 2010. So GRC is the piece of legal paper that trans people can get to legally recognise their gender. It is an important, piece of document. It's meant to be confidential, so people can't just be like, here's your GRC. But essentially they're asking, are trans women for the purposes of the Equality Act? And the ruling says no, and falls back on some, as the British Medical Association have said, scientifically illiterate interpretation of sex and gender by referring to specifically biological women. What is that? That's a very complicated term to unpick and define. And I don't think it's what these people think it is either. So this has created a huge challenge to the principles of the Equality Act, because technically now, if we interpret the law in the same way that Supreme Court ruling does, a trans... And it's the obsession with trans women as well. Only trans women.
Yeah.
A trans woman is no longer protected under the Equality Act for sex-based discrimination. So if someone's sexist or misogynist. But don't worry, because they're still protected under one of the other 9 protected characteristics of gender reassignment, which is a useful, important inclusion in the Equality Act, even though it's slightly outdated terminology for what we might talk about in terms of gender affirmation, for example, now. But that's the crux of the ruling. Sorry, that was quite detailed.
Oh, that's okay.
And then the consequences,
yes,
the day after and ever since in British news has been confusion from so many groups about what does this mean. You can imagine sports, public bathrooms, schools, universities. I mean, anyone who saw this is then like, what does that mean for us? And there is no information. It's about you interpret this. And so there has been interpretations.
There has been interpretation.
And some, I'm happy to say, have been inclusive and stood their ground. A lot of people are showing really showing who they are.
Absolutely.
And it was paper thin. And that shows, I think, that law did protect. Because now something is being lost. For example, access to bathrooms, access to sports teams. So that means it did protect, even though it was flawed, as you say.
Yeah.
And that's a bit of a wake-up call too, because it's easy to kind of criticize this stuff and then you lose rights overnight.
And also the Supreme Court case was clearly targeting trans women.
Yeah.
But it has huge impact for trans men, transmasculine people, non-binary people, intersex people. And it's been made worse, if you can believe it, by the interim guidance issued by another body called the Equality and Human Rights Commission, the EHRC, who issued interim guidance for public bodies in terms of implementing Equality Act post that Supreme Court ruling, which immediately said, so it came, I think, about a week after the Supreme Court ruling, and it basically doubled down, expanded, and was like, single sex spaces only for biological sex at birth. As Camilla said, this has immediately led to various organisations, whether that's banks or public bodies or the Football Association in the UK, has banned trans women from women's football immediately. Even though the EHRC guidance is guidance, it is not law.
You don't have to.
You don't have to follow it. Even though in practice it's, well, obviously discriminatory, but completely impractical and unimplementable. Like, are they checking everyone's pants before they let people into the toilet now? Are they bouncers? I don't know what's happening. And it's not law, but, you know, it's being implemented in that way.
But can you also talk about, though, because just not to be all like Pollyanna about it, but also the activism and the pushback. Like, it's not like people just sat down and were like, okay, then.
No,
right?
You're right. Yeah, no. And that's been the ray of sunshine in a very bleak time for me, where, you know, when you're seeing the pain in the people around you and your networks, and even, you know, people you maybe don't know but see online, and but yeah, there's been huge resistance so far, and famously the left in the UK can be very fragmented, a lot of infighting, but generally I would say that this is an issue that most of the left in the UK, the left of like politics, have come together on, apart from the Labour Party who are in government, but they're not really left-wing.
Apart from the Supreme Court, the government, the banks, you're fine.
You're
Yeah,
fine. Yeah, exactly.
It's all about power, though. Like
it's all about power. It's all about power. So yeah, we've seen huge amounts of resistance. I mean, the weekend after, and the 2 weekends after, every weekend there are protests in towns, cities, tiny villages. So the Orkney Isles had a protest of a few hundred people. I was Googling this the other week, trying to see where all the protests were. You know, the tiny seaside town, not tiny seaside town, that sounds very condescending. The seaside town of Bournemouth had, you know, so across the entire UK there has been resistance, people coming together. In Liverpool, where I live, you know, some weekends there's multiple protests, there's multiple events, and people have really come together to build new networks, to build new forms of organising, to resist and to be together in community, and that's been really good.
You told me yesterday that you were kind of part of this resistance. You have collected people in one place, right?
Yeah.
Do you have like you can tell me about
that
that's example?
Okay. No, just when you like, I was just imagining myself as a shepherd, or a sheepdog. No, not a shepherd.
It's basically
nothing quite so Christ-like.
but just some examples of what people are doing, because we are seeing some of the same rhetoric in Norway right now, so it would be good for our listeners to know what you can do.
There is so much you can do, and I think it's very important for me to think about, like, you can do this in every space that you occupy. Like high level, a very personal action. So I have done a lot of work over the years with the University and Colleges Union, UCU, in the UK. Through that, I've been in various roles in my workplace and nationally on like the National LGBT+ Committee with a number of other people. So one of the first things we did was like committee of our union come together, write a statement collectively, supplementary to the kind of statement that the union kind of officials put out. And it was lovely that our National Women's Committee wrote a really inclusive statement. They managed to get out before ours, but it was really good to see that, you know, straight away. Another thing we're doing is like written to my university administration going, you're not going to implement this, right? But, slightly more detail than that. But it's really important as well to like build networks as far as you can, I think. So me and some other activists called a online meeting on Zoom a few weeks ago, which was open to any member of a trade union in the UK. So there were
about this issue.
Mm-hmm. So it's called Trade Unionists for Trans Rights. Over 300 people joined that Zoom call on a Monday evening.
Wow, that's a great achievement.
I know. It was amazing. It was like amazingly chaired by comrade Debs, who's a school teacher. So we had, people from universities, people working in schools, people working in like local government roles, in healthcare, any sector. We probably had someone working in it at that meeting. And from that meeting, we agreed to 2 immediate actions. So one was to set up a WhatsApp group, which immediately had like 300 people in it. And I had accidentally agreed to set this up. So I now was in charge of a giant WhatsApp group, and to call a workplace day of action for the following Wednesday. We kind of quickly, someone designed a logo, some posters, and said, just do what you can in your workplace. Can you get everyone to meet up at lunch and like take some photos or have a trans flag wherever you are? Can you put something in your email signature? Can you change your Zoom background for the day? Whatever you can do, write to your MP, all of this stuff, but do something visible. So we had like school teachers at the, first thing in the morning with like pride, and trans solidarity signs, universities meeting up at lunchtime. Newcastle University was on strike. Their academics were on strike, one on the day of action. So they had a trans solidarity themed picket with lots of people at and speeches and things like that. So that was really successful. And the WhatsApp group has kind of spiraled and grown into a WhatsApp community, which I'm now also in charge of. But it now has over 700 members. We have 40 subgroups now. So there's like big group for everyone for cross-union, cross-region, across the UK solidarity. But we have different groups that members of each union can be in to share information about their own union, even if they might be in different ends of the UK. And then we have other groups for regions and nations. So if you like live in Northwest England, you can meet other people in Northwest England. Or it's generally working. There's a lot happening. I can't keep up with it. We have a great team of admins who have all volunteered to support that. We've written community guidelines. I think they're okay, but we probably need to refine them. But it's been a real source of strength and hope to see what you can actually do. You just go, shall we do this? And people go, yes. Yeah. So it's been great, even though it's horrible.
Yeah, it's really impressive to listen to how much you have done in such a short time.
Yeah.
As
really
a
is.
community and also you as a person.
Yeah.
And it's quite moving as well when I listen to you, like to hear how when there is a crisis within our community, we kind of get together and fight on all levels. And I think that's really, it's hopeful.
It is hopeful.
Yeah.
Because I think it was very bleak when the news came out about the ruling.
Yeah, it could have gone the other way, I guess, right? Like, I don't know what people were guessing and hoping, but...
I know it could have, but I know a lot of queer activists and trans activists who are exhausted because they've been doing this work for years in a very hostile, horrible situation. But it's been amazing to see the community, which isn't always there. Like, it's like, oh, women are all friends, or, it's like that thing, like, all queer people aren't necessarily hanging out all the time. I mean, we do, but... not necessarily on that scale.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's been amazing, and I'm just blown away by seeing the stuff that's sort of spiraling or happening in or around the group that we've created, and then just seeing all the stuff that's happening elsewhere.
But this like inspiration is interesting too, because rolling obviously transcends Scottish borders, British borders, right?
Absolutely.
And has become an international, like that movement is, you obviously see it in Trump's US, but the activism and that kind of history also spirals so easily over borders, right?
Absolutely.
So they don't have all the energy,
No.
Energy moves both ways. But would you say something also about the Trans Joy thing that you're arranging?
Yes. I'm vaguely involved.
No, but just tell us like
But,
what's
yeah.
happening, that
Yeah,
it's
sure.
happening.
Yeah.
It's cool.
So Liverpool is an amazing city, and it has a reasonably big queer community, a decent number of queer events and venues, safe spaces and stuff like that. And we've also had a trans pride for about 10 years, and I'm now part of a small team who are going to be organising trans pride. Some other activists are also organising in that space and have been really stepping up and stepping forward even more since the Supreme Court ruling. And so I've been working with an amazing woman called Connie, and she is working to bring different kind of clusters and groups of people organising in their little groups together towards making what we hope will be Liverpool Summer of Trans Joy. On the 1st of June, we will have a big kind of public rally meeting with lots of speeches to launch everything. And Connie's doing an amazing job of trying to find speakers who can talk about their own experiences from lots of different areas or aspects of the LGBTQIA plus community, so that, it will really hopefully be representative of our queer city. We'll be having a public assembly. There will be other smaller events, more various kind of demonstrations. Probably we like a good protest in our city.
Yeah.
And it will all culminate hopefully on the 28th with Trans Pride, which is when most of the students come back to the city. So hopefully it'll be a nice welcome for them.
That sounds amazing. And that's also so important to keep that joy part of it all when everything is so
Yes.
hard outside of the community, to keep the joy.
I think
in the community.
it's just so radical, like this year when that's happened in the UK, to be like, no, it's Liverpool's Summer of Trans Joy.
Absolutely.
You shall not have this year. This whole year you shall not have.
Exactly. No, it's amazing. And I'm so happy that I can be a small part of that. But it's a huge collective effort. And yeah, it's amazing.
We have to land this because you are going to a
Oh,
meeting. But is there anything that we haven't touched that you would like to say, or that you think is crucial to understand the current situation for trans people in the UK?
I think we've covered a lot of ground.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think even though I think for a lot of people the Supreme Court ruling was a shock.
Yeah.
Just recognizing that this has been a long time coming.
Yes.
And that it's very deeply embedded in British political and media culture.
But was it a shock for the trans community? For me, at least, we are following the situation in the United States so much, and this one we didn't see it coming from here because the Norwegian media is only covering the United States at the moment.
Yeah.
Was there a warning? Did anyone know that this was happening?
I think it's yes and no.
Yes and no.
Yeah.
I think for me, I was viscerally shocked,
Yeah.
but I wasn't surprised.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah. Me too. Like a ruling like that out of the UK, I would have guessed that's where it was going. But that the ruling came so suddenly, and even that they'd taken this case had kind of gotten off my radar a little bit. So I did see a lot of shock but not surprise.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, because as well, it's not the first case
No.
around trans issues in the legal system in the UK.
No.
So I'm sure people listening will probably have heard about the Maya Forstater stuff. Just Google it. Because it's
Or
a whole
not.
other podcast
Yeah.
or not.
Yeah.
But
It's
so-
not the first.
But it's also, that's the case that enshrined gender critical as a belief in law that could be protected.
Okay.
Mhm.
So that's hugely problematic
Mm.
because let's not open that kind of worms.
Yeah,
but
but
not-
that's protected, right?
Yes.
So
But
Yeah.
not all case law has been negative. I can't remember what year it was, but there was a case, Taylor versus Land Rover, look that up, which led to the clarification that non-binary people should be protected under equality legislation, can't be discriminated against for being
Mm.
non-binary,
Mm.
same as, so not all case law has been transphobic or discriminatory or negative for trans people. There has been useful clarification or useful case law.
But it's also about timing, though. Like,
Timing.
you could have a good faith argument about why this case now, and it is in a global context. No wonder the Norwegian media focuses so much on the US, because they're certainly doing all that stuff too. So that feels kind of odd too. why now? And why did they move so quickly? And I'm not saying they had other motives than, the law, but it just seemed an odd fit with, for example, what's happening in the US or Hungary. Or you have to take all of this together, and that's probably like the weight people feel in the
Absolutely.
right, because it's not just that you might be unsafe in the UK. It's like now you can't travel to the US, and like the world feels smaller. So that's why these like spaces that you've organized, it's just really beautiful.
Thank you.
Okay, then we have to end this episode, and I'm really, really happy that both of you came along. We had a meeting yesterday, and I was like, let's just make an episode tomorrow. And I'm so happy that you just said yes, and now
thank
we're
you.
here.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for inviting us on.
I've learned a lot in this episode, so thank you very much.
No, you're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you, and goodbye.
Yeah, and goodbye. Yes.
Bye. Takk for at du lyttet til denne episoden. Om du vil høre mer, så følg oss i din foretrukne podcast-app. Skeiv dagsorden er produsert av Thea og Mariann Skretteberg Andersen ved Senter for likestilling på Universitetet i Agder. Du kan lese mer om vårt arbeid på www.uia.no/senter for likestilling.
Musikk er laget av Mathias Leander Olsen. Episodene er redigert av Mariann Skretteberg Andersen. Foto er tatt av Knut Knudsen Eigeland, og det visuelle er laget av kommunikasjonsavdelingen ved UiA.